Hi everyone, my name is Taylor Ramirez and I am a senior here in the Schar School majoring in government and international politics and minoring in journalism. And I'm here today with Dr. Victor, who is a professor here in the Schar School. So can you just go ahead and introduce yourself and what your role is here at Mason?
Sure. I'm Jennifer Nickel Victor. I'm an associate professor of political science. My area of expertise is in American politics, mostly focused on the US Congress. And I've been at Mason for about 10 years on the faculty here. Before that, I was on the political science faculty at the University of Pittsburgh.
And so what first sparked your interest in politics and government, or more specifically, United States politics and government?
I'm one of those weird kids that was always interested in politics in some way. So the origin story I usually tell is when I was in the fourth grade. There was a big hopscotch craze at my school, and there weren't enough hopscotch courts. And I was the kid that organized like a petition that we took to the principal's office to try to get the school to make more hopscotch courts.
Okay.
And it was a big deal, and we walked it into the principal's office and all of this. So from a very young age, I had this idea that you could use the powers or of the people or the institutions or something. Of course, I didn't use those words at the time, to try to make the world better for people. And so that idea of politics, organizing institutions was sort of always there for me, I guess. The end of that story, by the way, is they did make new hopscotch courts, but not until we were in the sixth grade, and hopscotch was no longer cool.
Which is a little bit similar to government. Things take a little while.
There you go.
to actually see some results. So that's a great story. So I know also, in addition to being a professor here in the Schar School, you're the co-editor of the Oxford Handbook of Political Networks. I know you work with Open Secrets, if I remember correctly.
I'm on their board of directors.
Okay, and so I was just wondering, what are some of the things that you've been talking about or focusing on in those spaces outside of George Mason and your life as a professor here ahead of the midterm elections? What are the conversations happening? What are the kind of hot button issues?
Yeah. So campaign finance has always been an area of interest of mine. I've been on the board of directors for Open Secrets, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan group in DC that helps to make campaign finance and lobbying and all sorts of money and politics issues more transparent to people. I've been on their board for, I don't know, a few years. Can't remember when I joined. And it's not a paid role. Like, I'm basically a volunteer, sort of occasional consultant on things type thing. There's just been a lot that has changed in the last 10 years on campaign finance and the way that money operates in our politics. That it can be an overwhelming, confusing space, and it can be hard to understand the relationship between what goes on in that space and the outcomes that we see in terms of who wins elections or whatnot. So for example, in this election cycle, there's been a lot of focus on just the price tag of elections. So Open Secrets is estimating that this election is, when all is said and done, is going to be somewhere around the $10 billion mark, which is a lot. So it'll be the most expensive midterm election that we've ever had. And in 2020, we also practically double, we broke all records by a long shot. It was almost 15 billion in that year. And so the way that I've started to think about this, or the metaphor that I think is quite useful in modern context, is to think about this as campaign inflation, right? So if you talk to an economist about economic inflation, consumer inflation that we observe, they will talk about it as too much money chasing too few products, right? And so you can think of campaign inflation, the cost of campaigns, in that same way, where there's a lot of donors, there's a lot of money out there, a lot of people who would like to participate in the contest, and basically not enough candidates to donate to. And so over the last 10 years, we've changed the laws so that instead of giving the money directly to candidates, you can just use the money as an external expenditure, an independent expenditure, to just make your own ads about the candidates or nominally about them. And so we just have an overabundance of spending going on in campaign politics in a way that is really alarming to a lot of people. I mean, on the one hand, I don't know how much democracy should cost, right? Like, yes, they are huge price tags. The fact that it's been going up so quickly and at such a steep pace, I think is a bit alarming. But it's not the price tag itself that bothers me. It's the distribution of who is getting involved in that system and what the money says about who is able to sort of play the game and what the money is able to do, that I think leaves a lot of room for concern.
Mm-hmm. I know you just mentioned the 2020 election. I remember taking your election class in 2020, and which that election was, as you said, unprecedented and broke records for many different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that this election is different, is the same? Like, what kind of patterns are we seeing repeat themselves, or is completely new in this cycle?
So in a lot of ways, I think this midterm election is a little bit more textbook than prior elections. So without a presidential candidate on the ballot, it changes, in almost some ways lowers the stakes of elections. It lowers the population of people who are paying attention to it or who are getting, engaged with it in the same way. And of course, we don't know exactly how the elections. This is being recorded the day before Election Day, so we don't know how things are going to come out. But it's very much looking like that we will have the type of result that we would sort of expect. So the trend in midterm elections is that the party in power tends to lose seats. It's thought of as a referendum, and any sort of negativity is blamed on that party. So right now, the big economic concern is about inflation. So the Democrats are being blamed, rightly or wrongly, for that economic outlook. And so that gives Republicans sort of a structural advantage. So if you look at the political science forecasts of this election, those forecasts are usually made in the summer, like June, July, before you know what the big issues are, or even like what the candidate controversies or scandals are. Like, you don't even hardly know everybody who's on the ballot yet. And those models just look at which party holds the presidency, how popular is the president, and a couple of other like broad indicators about the economy and so forth. And those models indicate that Democrats should expect to lose between 40 and 50 seats in the House. Just on those structural features of the election alone, not months before the election. I think that Republicans, particularly in the Senate, have advanced a number of not very good candidates that have been vulnerable and easy to criticize from a number of angles. That makes a bit of a difference. Democrats have also gotten a bit of a boost from the Dobbs decision that came out in the summer that disrupted abortion rights and access to abortion for millions of Americans, and that has created a galvanizing political force for people who support abortion rights. And so for that and other sort of broader factors that I maybe won't go into, I think we can probably expect that structural trend of Democrats losing seats will hold, but it's probably going to be narrower. But if you want to just give yourself a baseline expectation for tomorrow night, I would say that if the Democrats lose anything less than 25 seats, then they have essentially beat expectations. Like, I often think of elections as what should our expectation be going in? My expectation, all else being equal, is Democrats should lose about 25 seats in the House. So if they lose anything less than that, then that is a sign of some benefit of campaigning or organizing or something else that either Republicans have done wrong or Democrats have done right.
Mm-hmm. So another question is, I follow you on Twitter, and something
Twitter.
Something that you said recently, which I found interesting, was that you described this election as having the power to slide the U.S. further towards authoritarianism or modestly reinforce democratic institutions. So obviously we are all hopeful for the latter because democracy is a good thing, but I guess my question would be, what do we do as young people who are kind of have a lot at stake, and we're just entering this new electorate and its new polarized environment? What do we do if it is, sliding us further towards authoritarianism, or what are the next steps people should be taking or thinking about?
No, that's a great question. So before I answer that, though, I would say it's important to know what it looks like to be sliding into authoritarianism. I think a lot of folks are under the impression that there will be some big event or some flashing sign that says democracy is dead now and we are a competitive authoritarian country or something like that. And it's not going to be like that. Democracies that decline very slowly. It's like a frog in boiling water doesn't even realize it's happening to them until they're dead, kind of thing. And that's essentially where the United States, we're at the frog boiling stage of democratic decline. And so just being able to understand what are the specific things that happen that we would identify as being as depleting the democratic institutions. And in this particular election, what I'm looking at is the number of people who get elected to office who deny election results. Either people who win or who lose, and I'm not sure whether they win or lose is really determinative of the attitude that they take, but whether they have won or they have lost, if they accept the outcome of the election, if they honor that outcome in a way that doesn't challenge the institution of elections. So there are a number of congressional candidates on the ballot that have called into question the 2020 election. And so how they respond to this election, either graciously or not in winning or losing, I think will be important. There's a number of governors on the ballot that are also sort of election denier or calling into question the institutions of democracy. Carrie Lake comes to mind of Arizona. So she is sort of a Trump firebrand style politician who is probably going to get elected tomorrow. And so looking at the type of rhetoric that she uses as either, it's interesting to be in a position of winning an election and then calling into question the validity of the institution. Mm-hmm. But I have a feeling that's what we're going to see from candidates like her tomorrow. So that's interesting to me. And then the third place to look for it is in a few Secretary of State offices. So this is not the type of candidacy that Americans usually pay attention to, but there's 20 some odd Secretaries of State on the ballot tomorrow in different states. And secretaries of state in most states are the office holder that is in charge of running elections. So the people that we elect tomorrow, or that a bunch of states are electing tomorrow, will be the people who are in charge during the 2024 presidential election. And particularly in Arizona and Nevada, there are Secretary of State candidates who are either explicitly or implicitly or have questioned the election validity of 2020. And so if we get lots of election denying folks who get elected and who are continuing to use that rhetoric as a way to build their political coalition, that is damaging to democracy and gives me some pause about how healthy the 2024 cycle, which begins in just 2 days, by the way, is going to be. But to your original question about, okay, so if that is what in fact happens and things continue to decline, which is basically what we expect, what should we do, or what should young people do to react to that? And I would say, I mean, it sounds so simple, but I really think the answers are quite simple. It's be engaged. It's join a campaign, join an organization, join a community organization, participate in your local community or with local politics. It doesn't even have to be something political, but anything that connects you to your community, however you want to define that, is the type of thing that can help reinforce some of those basic democratic fibers, I think. And beyond that, just, calling stuff out when you see it, trying to not participate in, because some of what's going on in politics right now is the politicians who are counting on stimulating that emotional response that people get when you take delight in somebody else's pain, or when you take delight in being insulting towards others, like that sort of very base human instinct that basically we all have. If we're attracted to people who are doing that, it creates a much less productive kind of politics that doesn't tend to serve the broader population. And so just being aware of that and noticing when politicians are doing that and trying not to elevate those politicians. Even by pointing it out, actually, we can elevate it, which puts us in a bit of a conundrum. So anyway.
No, it's good advice. Shifting gears a little bit and starting to wrap up, what can you describe the study that your Democracy Lab students are doing here on campus with the voting study and what you guys are looking to find?
Yeah, I hesitate to describe it too much because the study isn't over yet.
Okay.
But basically, we want to understand voting behavior and election participation among college students. So, and particularly among residential college students. So yes, Mason has 30,000 undergraduate students. Is that right? Something like that.
Something like that.
But only like 6,500 or so live on campus. But not just from Mason, but from all of universities across the country, we know that residential college students are a very particular kind of voting population that faces a lot of barriers to voting. So if you are living on campus at a university, by definition, you have just moved from someplace else. And people who have just moved and are living in a new community, that alone is a characteristic that makes people less likely to vote. Plus, voting on campus can be very confusing. Sometimes students aren't sure if they vote in the district where they live now on campus, or if they vote back home, or do they get a choice? Do they have to like change their driver's license? Or like, it can be very, very confusing. And frankly, it varies based on where people live. So in Virginia, it's actually gotten easier for students over the last few years. You can, if you live on campus, you can vote on campus, but you have to register as living on campus as your voting address, regardless of where else you've come from outside of Virginia or not. This year, for the first time, Virginia is offering same-day voter registration. So students who live on campus but haven't voted yet, didn't register, don't know where they're registered, whatever, could go to Merton Hall, show up on election day at the polling place in Merton Hall and say, I'd like to do same-day voter registration. And for that election, register to vote right there with your campus address, and then cast, it'll be a provisional ballot, but then you can cast a ballot. So in any case, the study is interested in understanding the strategies that are most successful at helping students overcome these barriers for participating in elections, for voting, and for engaging in that basic civic participation.
Very cool. Thank you. Well, I don't have any other questions, but thank you for joining us and for providing your wisdom. It's incredibly helpful to hear an expert kind of discuss all of the complicated things I know young people, myself included, and I'm studying government, have a hard time.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah. Have a hard time, kind of grappling with all of it at the same time. So thank you.
Yes, you're very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you.
Yeah.